welcome to our virtual data night for this school year. Thank you so much for taking the time to watch and hopefully process this information. We are here to share information on the testing that we do here at Peace Brantley, because we have multiple tests that we give for our students for many different reasons. We are asking that you watch this entire presentation, and if you have any questions at the end, it will tell you who to contact. We are going to have both of our guidance counselors present some information and two of our middle school teachers presenting information on the MAP test, the ACT Aspire, and our IXL diagnostic.
Hi, I'm Amber Frost. I'm the lower school guidance counselor and testing coordinator, and I'm going to talk a little bit about just kind of the general things for MAP growth and for ACT Aspire. So starting with MAP growth, we give it 3 times a year. Typically it's September, January, and May, and we do that for all grade levels. If we have first graders, so 1st through 12th. Students use their iPads to complete the test. There's not a paper option for this test, and it's individual and adaptive. So students will answer a question, and depending on how they answer it, it may get harder or it may be easier, but it does kind of start on grade level and go from there. And it adjusts to each student's performance, and it creates a personalized assessment that accurately measures performance. Even if the standards change, it does align with state standards or Common Core, but as we know, sometimes those change. The test is able to adapt with it. It's an untimed test, and each subject is approximately 45 minutes, but we run our test windows from around 8:45 in the morning to about 11, kind of depending on schedules. And students, it's best if they get there on time, but this test is a little bit more flexible. So if a student's running late, they're able to come in and start the test with the rest of their peers, which is very nice for them. Any students who have accommodations, they can use headphones to use these text-to-speech part for like directions, questions, and any of the math. However, reading passages are not read aloud. And they can also use scratch paper. They can, Zoom to have different fonts. They can also use a highlighter. Any student who doesn't finish the test in the time that we provide is allowed to complete the test later on in the day. And even if they don't finish that day with MAP growth, they're allowed, it stores it for up to 28 days. So we can find another time for them to finish testing, because the preference is really they only complete 1 subject per day. How it typically works with ours, we do reading, math, and language are the subjects that we test. If we start the week on a Monday, we test Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, and use Wednesday and Friday for makeup days. If we start on a Tuesday, then we test Tuesday, Thursday, Friday, and makeup testing days are Wednesday and the following Monday. If a student misses a lot of test days for whatever reason, and we already have testing from the prior session, then we most likely will not have that student makeup testing. Also, if a student has medical issues or they've been sick, anything like that, we recommend they probably won't complete testing because it's going to skew the results. And really what we want is to measure their true capacity. Once a year, we do ACT Aspire, and typically that's in April. We test that students in 3rd through 9th grade, and most students use iPads. ACT Aspire does have a paper option that we will allow for students that have the proper documentation. Students are tested on grade level for this test. It is not adaptive. The subjects are reading, math, and language. The test runs, we do these, it's a little bit longer because it typically takes longer for students to do these since it's on the grade level, from 8:30 to 12:30. And it works the same as MAP growth in that whatever day we start on is the days that we test, whether we start on Monday or Tuesday. Students will have time later on in the day to finish the test, but they do need to finish the test the same day they start it. And this is a kind of test that if a student runs late the day of testing, they're not allowed to start with their classmates. They'd have to make it up on a different day. ACT it's designed, it measures students' progress towards college readiness and college kind of over the course of time. So both tests are like looking at students' progress over the course of time, but ACT is geared more towards college and career readiness, whereas MAP growth is more about where they are right now, what they're ready to learn currently.
Hello, everyone. So I'm Tara Halichik. I'm the high school guidance counselor. I am going to talk about a couple tests that are specific to high school age students and also are optional for our students. So the first I'm going to talk about is the PSAT, then I'm going to talk about the SAT and the ACT. So one of the important things to note about these tests is that a student has to be approved for accommodations through the company that administers this test. So that would be College Board for the PSAT and the SAT, and ACT is the company that gives the ACT. So what happens is I send away a student's psychoeducational evaluation. It needs to be updated typically within 3 years of when they're starting to take these tests. And then that company approves the accommodations for our students. Typically what we see as far as accommodations is extended test time. Sometimes they'll provide MP3 so the student can listen to the testing. And for the PSAT and the SAT, they can be approved for a calculator because those tests have specific no calculator sections. But again, all of that is based off of your student's psychoeducational evaluation. So the PSAT is technically an 11th year, so an 11th grade test. We have our students start taking it in 10th grade if you choose to register for them. And it's just because it gives them a little bit more time to practice, become comfortable with taking a Scantron test, because these are, at this point, still paper pencil tests. They are not given on the iPad. Then the PSAT is, like I said, traditionally for their 11th grade. And then the SAT and the ACT, they typically start taking in 11th grade and will continue taking it for 12th grade if they choose to do so. And it's something that you and I can have that conversation and involve the student in. Are they motivated to try to take the test again? Do they want to put in the practice? There's so many practice materials out there that we can utilize. But a lot of it depends on your student and what their path is after high school. The SAT and the ACT are used for admissions to colleges and in some cases placement into classes. So that's all things that we want to consider when we're deciding on which test is best for your student to take and when. But it's something that we will work on. I promise I will communicate that with you. Once they enter high school, we'll start talking about, do they need an updated psychoeducational evaluation? So don't jump to that right now. If you're not in high school, I promise I will communicate that with you. The last thing I want to talk about a little bit before we get on to more detailed information about the MAP and the ACT Aspire and all that good stuff is just general thoughts about testing, whether it's the testing we give here, like the MAP and the ACT Aspire, or whether it's standardized testing like the PSAT, the SAT, and the ACT that are given from other companies. I like to kind of look at testing, like if I were to come to your home and pull out a photo album of your child, if I looked through that entire photo album, I'm probably going to get a really good idea of what your child is like. I'm going to see their interests. I'm going to see the good days and the bad days. I'm going to see, just a wide array of things, places they've been. If I were to pull out a photo album of a day that you guys decided to go to Disney World and your child was not feeling it that day, I'm going to see a very different picture of your child if I just look at one day. Think of testing the same way. On any one of these individual tests, your student could have had a bad day. They might have had a meltdown at Disney. They might not have wanted to go out to celebrate their sibling's birthday that day. Kids have these days, but when we look at testing, we're going to look at the ACT Aspire, the MAP, over all the data collections. We're going to look at the photo album of your child that is testing. So just keep that in the back of your brain when you get your testing results. And we're about to give you so much amazing information, and it's so detailed and it's data driven, which is great. We love that. But please just keep in mind that when we look at your child and testing, we're looking at the photo album, not the individual day.
I think I wanted to add something quickly to just kind of go along with what you were saying is we have to test. We're required to do testing according to the scholarships that we've received. And it's just part of the information that we use. I feel like sometimes, parents and students worry that, the ACT Aspire and MAP growth is going to affect them going to the next grade, or it's going to affect which teacher they have. And that's just not something we do here. It's part of it. And we'll talk to you about it. And if we see something that, does need attention, we're going to take care of that. But we really try to have a more relaxed atmosphere for testing for the students. I feel like they've all kind of done it enough now that they don't get worried, they don't get stressed. That is not our goal. Our goal is just to give you information, and so you know where your child is at academically.
Okay, awesome. Well, I'm Rachel Colon. I'm a middle school math teacher here at PACE. And I'm just going to talk to you a little bit about the some of the vocabulary that comes along with the testing reports, and just talk a little bit about the ACT Aspire and IXL Diagnostic. Awesome. Okay, so welcome to Data Night. We're going to take a look kind of at your child and their relationship with testing. So we're going to talk about grade equivalency and percentiles, and map growth, ACT Aspire, and the IXL diagnostic report. So this is a lot of information, but we try to include as much as possible just to make sure that you guys have a good idea of what we're measuring and how we use it here at PACE. So the first one we want to talk about is sometimes you will get grade equivalency scores in your student's report. Now, we want you to understand that a grade equivalency just means that your child performed as well as a child in that grade level would, or would be expected to perform on the same test. So for example, a 4.9 is the 9th month of 4th grade. What that does not mean is that your 8th grade student, or whatever grade level they are in, belongs in 4th grade. That's not how we use that data. We just look at on that day, this is where they performed. It's really important. And when we talk to our students about that, we share that. We say, you don't belong in this grade level. It doesn't mean I'm going to boot you back to 4th grade. It just means that on that day, that is how they performed. The next word that you'll see quite a bit when we look at testing data is percentiles. So when we look at percentiles, if you scored in the 80th percentile, it essentially means if we lined you up, you would be the 80th person in line, or you performed as well or better than 80% of that group. That varies from percentage. That a percentage is if I got 80 questions correct out of 100, I have an 80% percentage. So percentile is out of a lineup of people, where am I placed? A percentage is accuracy. Out of how many did I get correct? All right, so next up, we're going to talk about the ACT Aspire. So as Ms. Frost shared, the ACT Aspire is our nationally normed test. It is standards based, and it tests students at their grade level. So if your student is currently in 5th grade, they are going to be tested on 5th grade standards. This is our way of seeing where they are performing in comparison to peers across the nation. This one, all of them are grade level and content based, and they all receive the same questions. So this one doesn't vary. They're not getting harder questions. They're not getting easier questions. They are all getting the exact same questions. When we look at ACT Aspire, we are given scale scores, and when you see your reports, you will be given scale scores, and all we're looking to see is that students are continuing to show growth within those specific scales. This is an example of an ACT Aspire report. You will see that they give us nice visuals with these graphs. And what this does is this allows us to see, compared to their national peers, or compared across the nation, where are those students performing on that day. Very important to remember, it is on that day and in that moment. So when we're looking at this, we are given their national percentile rank, and then we also use this information. We can see they put them within a readiness threshold, and it just allows us to see if they continue on this path, where are they in regards to college and career readiness. We do not view this as the end all be all. Again, we know some days are better than others when it comes to test taking, but it is a good snapshot and a good picture of comparatively where are they performing on those grade level standards. And so in a nutshell, to sum it up, ACT Aspire is our way of measuring students based off of these standards and their grade level. Please remember that this is without teacher support. This is when they are provided the accommodations that they're allowed based off of their SEP. But this is really the students showing us what they can do on a grade level assessment. And next up is something near and dear to my heart. It's the IXL diagnostic. All of your students are very familiar with it, whether they are in elementary, middle, or high school. The IXL diagnostic is completed through our IXL program. The students complete it through an app or through the website. But what this is a fluid and ongoing assessment that the math teachers use throughout the school year to determine which specific skills can we be working on with your students in the classroom to help fill some of those gaps. The IXL diagnostic report breaks math down into 6 main areas, and we'll see that on a report here in a minute. And what it does is it gives us a very easy to read visual of what are your students' strengths and what are some areas where we can continue to facilitate and support them in to help them grow as learners. When the students take the IXL diagnostic, it gives them an individual plan that they can be working on. So this is something that we can assign to them, and they can go in and work specifically on an individual skill that is meant for them to help them improve. It could be a skill that maybe they haven't seen since elementary school, or it could be a skill that they're ready to move on to next. So the math teachers, across the board, we use this to help support our kids, and it's also a great way to set goals with them. The diagnostic levels do align with grade levels. So a diagnostic level of 500 would be about a beginning 5th grade level. Now, again, going back to grade level equivalency, this does not mean that your child would belong in that grade. It just means that maybe in that skill group, they need a little bit of support, or maybe that's where they are right now, and we'll work from that 5th grade level to continue to push them as they go. So the next slide is going to be an example of a diagnostic report. As you can see, it's broken down, and the students, have all learned how to use this to kind of look and see, wow, this is an area of strength for me, and this is an area where I might need some support. So we use this data and we use this plan like a checklist weekly in class. And the students are able to go through and again, target individual skills that they may need more support in. So this is just an awesome tool that we are able to use after taking the IXL diagnostic. The assessment itself is something that the students work on throughout the entire school year. So don't be surprised if you see that your students' levels are shifting and changing weekly. It does that just based off of the fact that the students are working in the IXL program. But anyway, it's an awesome tool. Your students all have access to it. So we use this weekly. So this is something a lot of people ask, well, what can I be doing for extra support at home? This is an awesome tool for you guys to kind of reference if you're ever looking for that. But I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Katie Reiki. She's going to share a little bit about map growth.
Hello, I am Katie Reiki, and I am a middle school teacher here at PACE, and I teach reading and language arts. So I'm going to explain a little bit more in depth about the MAP growth testing, which is the measures of academic progress. And like Ms. Frost said, we give this test 3 times a year. So in September, in January, and then again in May. So they are very familiar with this, and we have been giving this test since the 2017-2018 school year. So for many of our kiddos who have been with us for a while, we have some real good data based on how they've progressed. So how this test works is different than achievement testing in that this is an adaptive test, which means that it adapts to your child. So this test really looks at comparing your child to your child and how they're growing over time. So when a child is presented with a question on their level, based on how they answer that question, the next question given to them will either be more difficult if they get that question correct, or it will be easier if they did not get that question correct. So the test adapts as the child moves through the testing. So it also measures what we call RIT scales or RASH units, which means for us as teachers, where our children are and where they're ready to learn today. So it measures not just grade level, but where they specifically are in relation to what skills and what areas that they are ready to learn. And this test also, the scores are compared over time. So we look at where the children start, and then similar to rungs on a ladder or inches on a ruler, we're looking at how that child compares over time to their score. So we do get some information from this test with regard to comparing how the children are doing based on national percentiles. We are also given on the report that we'll look at in a minute, how it correlates to the Florida Standards Assessment, or the FSA. So it gives us a general idea of if our students were to take that test, where they would score. And it also provides some projected ACT college readiness scores if they move on to take those tests later. So it breaks down the testing into three main areas: reading, mathematics, and language usage. So we look at all of the sub-scores for the specific skills that are covered within those three main areas. The other thing that we can look at when we look at the testing results is growth goals. So starting usually in about late elementary, definitely by middle, and then on to high school, we will meet with our students when we receive those scores, and we go over that information with them. We like to sit down with them one-on-one. We go over the testing. The students will set goals for themselves about where they'd like to make some gains. And they can see their growth over time. So it's really one of my favorite things to do as a teacher is at the beginning of the year when we meet with them individually and we set those goals and we talk about, especially our kiddos who have been with us for a long time, and we have all this data to show how far they've come. And they can see that, you know, when they started with us, they might have been in the red area and their score was lower, and now they're all the way up to a higher score, and they can see, oh, I really do need to work a little bit more on geometry. And so it's very motivating for our kiddos to really get to see that long-term data and to see how much they've progressed. Okay, so for the next slide you'll see is the growth normative data. So this gives you an idea in each of the areas, the reading, the math, and the language usage, based on where your child is in terms of their grade level, where we would expect their score to be based on the norms. So we wish that in the beginning of the year, if your child is in 6th grade, we would expect to see a different score than we would at the end of the year. They also provide SD, which is the standard deviation, which is the range that we would expect our children to fall within if they were to retake that same test. So you can see that there's some variation there as well. So this is just information that you will have just to kind of know where your child might fall. But again, we take all of this data, you know, with a grain of salt, and we remember that this is one, you know, picture of your child, and it certainly is not the end all be all. So here is an example on the next slide of what you would receive as a parent. So you'll get to see what the score, or the RIT score, would be for your child, and then have that score compared to what the norm grade level would be, which would be the yellow score. Also, if you have a child who has been here for a long time and they've received this test 3 times a year for several years, you're going to end up with a lot of scores across the page. So you'll be able to see over time the growth that they've made in each of the areas. You'll also get to see the specific areas that the test is measuring. So for example, in the reading, you would get to see where their score falls in terms of literature, vocabulary, and then informational text. So it's broken down from that as well. Of course, if you have specific questions about this would be an example of when you might contact the student's teacher to find out more specific information about the scores in that specific area. So just in a nutshell, to give you an understanding of the MAP growth testing, this really we're looking at in terms of how we measure a child's growth over time. So it shows us where they're starting from when we get them at the beginning of the year and how they're progressing in relation to themselves. So we're comparing that child to that child. As teachers, it really helps us to see the progress that they've made over time, as well as what skills they are currently ready to learn next. We can also plan for those specific skills that may need a little bit more work, or that we need to address more specifically in class, or areas that the child is very successful with, that we can enrich your child in that specific area. So it's a real great opportunity for us to just use that data to help us plan lessons when it comes to group work, or when it comes to individual practice. So because we've been giving this test for many years, we have certainly noticed some trends that have occurred over time. So it's very important for us to remember that we're really looking not just at one score, but over a long period of time, how your child is progressing. So we have seen some common trends occur, such as there tends to be occasionally a decrease in a score in a specific area from that fall score to the winter score, which sometimes is because when a child is starting the school year, we expect a little summer slide to occur. We might have a certain expectation about where on that grade level that child might fall. But then when they go to take the test in the winter, the expectation will increase for that child based on the time of year, what they've learned, that they're further along in the school year. So the first, few questions may be more difficult, and then the child may have difficulty answering some of those questions. So it doesn't happen all the time, but we certainly, as we've done this year after year, we have noticed that tends to be a trend that can occur. The other thing that typically, or there can happen, is your child might receive an outlier score in a particular area. So they might do really, really well in the reading part of the test in spring. And so they get a score that shoots way up. Or the other way, they could get a score that is really much lower than the trend that we're normally seeing for that child. So again, keeping in mind that this is one day and it's just one moment in time for that. So we take that information with a grain of salt. It's useful and helpful to see, but we don't put a ton of importance on when we see those outlier scores happen occasionally. What we most often see, and what we would expect to see, is that slow and steady increases. So we're hoping to see that trajectory to just increase over time. And remembering over time, after many, many years, that is typically what we will see long term. So that's just important to remember, that this is tracking growth over a long period of time. Okay, so how do we use this information in the classroom? So again, our daily instruction as teachers, we take all of this data from all of the testing, and we can use that to help us target specific skills that we know we need to address in the classroom, whether that's done as a whole group or whether it's done individually, that we can plan specific lessons that are related to any of the areas that we notice may be more difficult for specific children. We also have this wonderful time during the school day called skills practice. So we have this set period of time that we see students Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, and Friday for 30 minutes, where we target specific skills that your child needs to practice. So we rotate the topic, the subject area. So we would have a reading rotation, a math rotation, and then a language arts rotation. And typically we get to have 2 reading rotations and 2 math rotations during the year. So this time is where we really target specific individual skills that your child needs to work on, whether that's in math, reading, and language arts. And it's been a really great time that we have built into the day to allow that extra individualized practice. The other piece of information that we do receive from the testing is the Lexile score, which really we use as reading teachers to determine the level of complexity of the text. This can also be really helpful for you as parents when you're deciding what books to read and trying to kind of decide, come up with the jumping off point of where do I start and is this book appropriate? This Lexile score is really helpful in determining what level the book should be to choose with your child. But remember, that Lexile is really based on their independent reading. So they could certainly choose a book that's more difficult, that's a higher Lexile than what the testing might show, if it's a book that you read together as a family, or if it's an audiobook that your child listens to. So, but it just provides a really good just jumping off point for helping you as parents to determine if that book is going to be appropriate for my child to read. Just remember that that testing is not the end all be all. It is one tiny piece of a very large and complex puzzle that is your child. And so we look at that along with all the other information that we gather about your child during the year. So it is certainly helpful and it is certainly useful. And we as teachers value all of the information we receive from the testing. But please remember that it's just like Ms. Halachek said, that it is just one picture of one day of the photo album of that whole child. So it does not measure all of those other skills that we know are incredibly valuable and that we really facilitate in our children: kindness, grit, the desire to learn, curiosity, all of those skills that we value and that we instill in our students every day. They are not measured with this testing. So please remember that when you receive your reports, that those skills are not on the testing. If you have any questions about any of the information that has been provided, please, if you have a general assessment question, you can email either Ms. Frost or Mrs. Halachek. But if you have specific questions about your child in terms of their academic areas, then please email those teachers.
Thank you so much again for watching this entire presentation. I am Jennifer Four, principal here at Pace Brantley School, and I would like to thank our guidance team, Mrs. Halachek and Ms. Frost, and I'd like to thank Ms. Riki and Mrs. Cologne for explaining all of this information in more detail, and definitely explaining how teachers use this to guide instruction in the classroom. I know from being in the classroom that I did not have this tool, and it was something when we had the opportunity to bring it on, especially the map testing, to really give us some data behind making curriculum decisions and instructional decisions. I know that it is something we were very excited about. So I'm so happy to hear both of you share how it is utilized in the classroom almost every single day with our students. So I appreciate that very much. Thank you all again for joining us. And if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to us.